so much for coming. My name is Ellen Nelson. I'm a visual artist. I'm also a art teacher at the district. I've been in at the school for quite a number of years. I teach various sections of studio art and then AP art history. My passion has always been art and art history. I love when it gets combined. I'm also curious about how different disciplines can kind of mesh. And so when you think about blending, meshing disciplines, I think you can't help but think about the gentleman known as Leonardo da Vinci. He's often referred to as a Renaissance man. So when we say Renaissance man, what does that mean? Go ahead.
New Age?
New Age, yeah, absolutely, New Age. And that's more of a, I think of a, that's often what we use it for. A Renaissance man is a person who's like really skilled at a lot of different things. So Leonardo was known as a botanist, as a musician, as an architect, as a painter, a sculptor, you name it. He was pretty much interested in a variety of things. You know, he developed the parachute. He developed one of the first ideas for looking at the moon with some kind of glasses he mentioned. He was also extremely interested in the human body. So what I want to try to do is I want to explain to you this idea of the golden mean, and then I'm going to go and take a look at how the golden mean played out in some of his works. Whether intentionally or specifically, that's the big question, you know. And so just keep an open eye, keep a critical eye on tonight's lecture. So there it is, Leonardo and the golden mean. And so the first thing that we need to do is we need to try to figure out what does the golden mean. So if after I say this, it doesn't make any sense, don't worry. Because a lot of times the first time it goes in, it's just like, I don't even understand what she's saying. But basically it means, a mean is a relationship. So if I say something like, brother is to sister as father is to mother, right? You are using sort of a comparison of four things. So it's like two sets of things. So that's what a mean does. And that's what a ratio is. It's trying to figure out, is it double, is it triple, or whatever. But basically it means is what if we take a single line and we divide it, and we look at the division of the line. We look at A and B. So we have A as the larger part, and we have B as the smaller part. Well, what it means is it means that the larger part, the large part, if we add the large part and the small part together here, the large part and the small part together, shares the same relationship. This is the large part. So large, this whole thing, the large, to that segment there is the same as A to B. So it shares this amazing kind of relationship. And we can also look at the golden mean when we take a look at a rectangle. So it's the same thing. The A again is the larger part and B is the small part. And then when we look at this large section, we can say that it shares the same relationship to the A plus B. And so it says again, then again, the large is to the small as the large is to the small. And we get this crazy number. The crazy number is actually it's a ratio, and it's a 1.618. And dot dot dot. Does anybody have any idea what the dot 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 means? It goes on forever. It means that if we try to divide it, we keep coming up with an odd number. We have to carry it again and again and again. And the repetition of it it's called an irrational number. It just goes on in infinity, which is kind of crazy. And so that fraction, or that number, is actually kind of a magical number, and that symbol is the symbol for phi. And so it is also connected to this crazy sequence of numbers known as the Fibonacci numbers. Fibonacci numbers are constructed where you always just add the next number. So 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 2, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 3 plus 5 equals 8, blah, 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 blah. And then when you look at these numbers, when we first start out, they get a little wonky,
But then as we go into these larger numbers, these are all Fibonacci numbers, you'll see how those, this 1.618 starts leveling out. And that's what's cool about the golden mean. It starts to just sort of like self-replicate. So there's things known as Penrose Tiles, and there's things like self-replicating entities like different fractals and things like that, that are actually, this is the source of them. And so if that whole thing didn't make any sense at all, one of the things you can do is you can simplify it. And you can simplify it simply by taking a line, dividing the line into thirds, and just saying that there's a magical relationship between the third and the 2/3, okay? That was pretty easy, right? Mm-hmm. That's a good one to remember. And if you're, so just always revert to that. So we have golden rectangles all over the place. We have them with our credit cards. That piece of paper that's in front of you is pretty close to a golden mean. And as you can imagine, a lot, if you're like a critical listener, you're thinking, well, some of this is true sometimes, it's not true all the time. You have to think of it as sort of on a theoretical level in terms of, the math of it behind that. So here we go. Let's try to take a test. So here we have a row of rectangles, and pretend you didn't hear anything that I just said before as I started the lecture. I want each of you to pick out your favorite rectangle. Just pick out your favorite rectangle. Okay, has everybody got it in their head? Which one is your favorite? Okay, so I'm going to have to show of hands, okay? We're going to move from left to right, and all you do is when we move from, let's see my little radar thing, so let's take the first one. Hands for the number 1. Anybody like that one? Oh, jeez, okay. Next one? Okay, great, we got 2. This one? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, next one. 1, 2, 3, and that one. 1, 2. Okay, so you know what I'm going to say, that guess what? This is the golden rectangle. Okay, so it turns out that aesthetically we find things that are in the golden ratio very, very beautiful. And isn't that a weird thing? I mean, why? Why should we find that beautiful? Well, it turns out that a lot of things in nature actually are according to the golden mean. Because the golden mean is very economical, and we know Mother Nature is very economical with her designs. She just doesn't waste a lot of her resources. And so I think throughout the ages, the human brain has just discovered that, oh, okay, so Mother Nature is pretty good at design. I see it as beautiful, and voila, it turns out to be the golden mean. So, you can buy that or not. But it was a German physicist and a psychologist in the 1870s. He did the same experiment, just like we did today. And sure enough, it turned out, oh, I see, it does work, but it doesn't work on the board. And you told me that, and I didn't believe you. I'm like, oh, he doesn't know. He doesn't know my. I have a very special laser. Apparently, I don't. But there you have it, and there it was. Some people voted, but the majority of them did love that golden rectangle. Here's another really interesting one. There was a professor, an engineering professor at Duke University. And he said that, well, maybe part of the reason why we like these golden rectangles is it actually sort of emulates our peripheral vision. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, that we're just sort of used to that kind of, I don't know if I buy it or not, but there it is, and so that sort of scanning, what we can scan with a page or so on, is actually a golden rectangle. So we have Phidias, and that's where we get our phi. Remember, the phi was the symbol for this golden ratio or mean. It all means the same. And he applied it to the designs of the Parthenon. And it really does, work out that a lot of the segmentations of the Parthenon really can be described were explained by the golden mean. So we have 1 and then that 1.618, which is really interesting. And there it is again. What we find also is when you create these golden rectangles, and if you should create a square within the rectangle, you actually end up with another golden rectangle, which is really super cool. and it kind of goes on into infinity. So then I take this golden rectangle, divide it into a square, and then that resulting rectangle is a golden rectangle. I can do it again, into infinity. And so that's kind of cool. And that's what we're actually going to practice today, because I believe in hands-on, experience, interactional sort of things. So the golden rectangle, in the egg, the ear, the rose, the Parthenon. I didn't include it in the lecture, but they even have one where they take Donald Trump's like interesting wave of his hair and they do it and they end up with his ear. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm going to include that one. All right, and then we have this cool thing which is known as the golden mean caliper. It's really, really interesting. I don't really understand how it works, but it does work. And remember what I said, if you can't figure out all that kind of crazy math, you can remember it as, 2/3 and 1/3. So what they did was, you can walk around and just say, well, what's a golden mean? And you can say, well, it is the long and then the short, and we come pretty close. This rectangle that we have, this 8.5 by 11, comes pretty close. Let's just check it out. So there's the long side, right? And then if we go here into the shorter side, we get pretty close. It's a little bit more narrow. And then I was messing around with this thing with my kids, not my own like birth kids, my students, I call them my kids. I have this Goliath beetle, and I was like, let's try it on this one. This is really cool. Look at this one lines up really well. If you look at the segmentation of the beetle and his body, his main body and the head, you actually get a golden proportion. It's not only that, but you get another one. I was just messing around with it. It is the length of the, let me see if I can get it again. It was the length of his body and the side of his, let's see, what was I doing here? Yeah, the length of his wings goes to the side of his head there. So it is in nature, and as like I said, nature is very economical when she designs, and so that's part of the reason for it. So let's go on to the next slide. There's a gazillion ones. We have them all over our body, believe it or not. We have them in the digits of our fingers. There it is. We have them in our fingers. That goes the A, B, C, D. That remember that the large part is to the small part as the total is to the large part. That's the relationship. And here's an X-ray of the phalanges, the fingers. Again, remember that 2, 3, 5, 8. That's a series of Fibonacci numbers. There it is again. And then again, it's even the relationship between the fingers to the wrist and then the hand to the arm. So it's pretty amazing. So of course the critics or the skeptics in the room, what are you saying? Okay. Come on, skeptics, what are you saying? I don't want you to just like swallow this stuff. I want you to debate. You could say, well, wait a minute. All bodies have different proportions, right? And yes, of course, you're not always going to get the golden mean for every body, but in general, there seems to be sort of this trend. So I like skeptics, don't worry, I'm a skeptic. And then the human face, and of course, we all have different proportions to our face, but in general, generically. And what's interesting about these divisions is, scientists, behavioral scientists are always investigating this thing and this idea of like what is beauty, and they time and time again they'll superimpose a golden mean onto like Kate Moss, right? And there it is, bingo. It somehow works out.
So the supermodels.
The supermodels.
Like
yeah.
That's what everybody finds attractive.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Beauty.
Symmetry.
Yeah. Symmetry. We love symmetry. Yep. We absolutely do. And then there's another one for the navel. As we measure the whole body and end at the golden section for the navel, we find that we have another like golden rectangle, or at least a division in the golden rectangle. So the golden rectangle, I mentioned before, divides into a square and then you end up with another golden rectangle. And that's known as a whirling square, so we can just keep going on and creating these golden rectangles and then superimposing a square onto it and then keep moving. And there is what we're going to do. We're actually going to make an Archimedean spiral. And there's all our Fibonacci numbers as we go through. So this is connected to, this is a shell, foraminifera, I think it's called. Okay, so let's try this and see if we can do this. So all of you have received a piece of paper and a pencil. If you have not, let me know. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the piece of paper in a horizontal position with this. I put this little strange square. You need that on your lower left-hand side. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
All right. That represents that square there. First move is pick up your pencil, and right beside it, that means to the left, you're going to add your little square. Because what was the first number on that Fibonacci number? Does anybody remember on that Fibonacci series? What was it? We started with a 1, and then we go 1. That's the only time we repeat it. So this is our 1 and 1. So put your square just to the left of the original square that you found. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put a curve on the lower right-hand corner and connect it with the upper left. So go ahead and start your curve. Go ahead and start your curve. That is going to be inside your new little square, your 1 by 1 square, and you can put your curve in. You're doing great. Fantastic. Any questions, just raise your hand. Next one. If we follow our Fibonacci, we go 1 plus 1 equals 2. Yes. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a square, and it's going to be a square that is a 2 by 2 square. So go ahead and put your 2 by 2 square up, and we're going to build up. So build up 2, over 2, and that's your first one. And then let's add our little yellow, let's do our little curve. A little curve, and it looks better if you can put a little bounce in that curve, a little bounce in the curve. Ooh, you have a nice curve. My curve was really flat. Little bounce in that curve. Cool, excellent. And you're doing great, everybody good? And so then we have, what are we doing? We're doing 1 plus 2 equals, help me, 1 plus 2 equals 3. Thank you, excellent. So now we're gonna go to the right and we're gonna do a 3 by 3. So here we go, 3 over, 3 down, 3 over, 3 down, and then we're supposed to put our nice little curve, and I'm going to try to do a better bounce with my curve. You guys are showing me up. There, beautiful. All right, and then we do a, where are we? We're 3, right? So 2 plus 3 equals, bingo, 5. We're going to drop down 5. So go ahead and count 5 down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 down, and we're creating a 5 by 5 square, and then we're going to connect a nice little curve there. I'm trying to make mine nice and bouncy. That means it's supposed to be like an elastic curve, really nice and beautiful. And then we have 3 plus 5 equals 8. Yes, you guys are great. We're going to extend out now to the left. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 by 8. And as you can tell, we're getting bigger and bigger. And we're building these golden rectangles based on the square. And what we're going to end up with is what's known as an Archimedean spiral. Not all spirals are created equal. There's an equilateral spiral. That means that is a spiral that has always, the center is the same, the arcs are the same degree. Archimedean spiral is, the angles are different. How we doing? Okay, we've got 5 plus 8 equals, oh no, we gotta count to 13, darn it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 13. Okay, 13 up. I promise you this is almost done. Okay, we're 13. And then we're gonna do our curve. Curves are not easy to do. I have to kind of sketch them out. How's everybody doing? Looks great. Fantastic. Everybody good? Beautiful. When was the last time you actually did something like this? Maybe in geometry class?
Yeah, my freshman math class. Can't remember.
And what's our, we've got righties, we've got a lefty, right, left, right. Oh, wow. We're heavily rights. I grew up in a family of, I had 6 brothers and sisters, and 4 of us were lefties, and the others were rights. We'd always have battles between the rights and lefts.
Okay, I think this is our last one, so we have, what is it? Somebody help me out. We have,
13.
yeah, 8 plus 13, right? And that's gonna be a 21, so let's go, last one. 1, 2, 3. You are going to make a square that is 21 blocks over, 21 blocks down. And then we're gonna do our nice, beautiful curve here. Let me switch it over. Bingo. Yay. Now you can imagine, if we had a big enough paper, we could just keep going into infinity. So what you've done is you've just created this amazing Archimedean spiral. Isn't that beautiful? Okay. So we have Archimedean spirals all over the place. One in particular is what's known as a nautilus shell. And I brought a nautilus shell here so you could, mine's reversed, yeah. Yay, okay. You can, here's the nautilus shell, you can pass it around.
What do you call those numbers again? Vinci.
Yes, Fibonacci numbers, Fibonacci. And they were based on a gentleman whose name was Fibonacci of Pisa, believe it or not. He actually, he discovered them. So there's the unfolding of the golden rectangle. So there we go. So now hopefully we have some sense of what the golden mean is, and then we're going to go see what Leonardo is up to. So he was born in Pisa, I'm sorry, not in Pisa, but in Vinci, which is just north of Rome. And he was born in 1452. So if we think about 1452, can somebody give me a sense of what was happening like in Italy or maybe in America or close to it? Discovery of America, right. So that was the new world. In Italy, they were experiencing a renaissance. They were coming out of sort of the doom and gloom of the medieval time period. Blossoming into a sense of themselves, because during the Renaissance it was the idea of humanism, that we had the power as humans, as individuals, to do things. And we didn't have to sort of take our cue necessarily from religion. So he was actually born as an illegitimate child. His mother was a woman who was in town, and her peasant girl, her name was Caterina. When he was 5 years old, he was sent to live in his father's house, and then eventually his father married a 16-year-old girl. She remained childless and lavished her affection on Leonardo. During that time, he was allowed to kind of roam around the countryside, and he would collect shells and rocks, and he was pretty much, able to do whatever he wanted to do. So that sort of began his real investigation into the natural world. He didn't necessarily receive a official education, but he certainly knew the world around him. Because he was illegitimate, he was not able to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything, of the higher echelons if you wanted to stratify society, because he was not permitted to go to the university. But fortunately, his father identified his ability to draw and took him to visit a renowned artist whose name is Verrocchio in Florence. And so this is just a little cool story about his father went up to him one day, and he's about, about 10 or 11 or 12, and the father wanted him to create a just horrifying shield, just to scare everybody. And so Leonardo, he created a pet dragon. This story refers to it, and this was what he glued onto the shield, gluing other animal parts to the lizard. And when it came time for him to reveal the shield to his father, he had it propped up in his room. He had just a little shaft of light shining onto the shield, and his dad walked into the room, and his dad was just scared stiff. So he just thought, this is great. I've actually achieved my goal of terrifying my father. So he gets teamed up with Verrocchio. Verrocchio is in Florence. He has this amazing atelier, or what they call a studio, many assistants. During this time period, it would be a whole echelon of apprentices and journeymen and masters. So sure enough, Leonardo starts working with Verrocchio. Here is a beautiful drawing by Verrocchio. They say that at one point Verrocchio drew an angel and then asked Leonardo to draw an angel right next to him.
And before Verrocchio could turn around, Leonardo had produced just this amazing angel, and the myth is that Verrocchio just never picked up a pen or a paintbrush again. You know, he was just like outshined by his student. But this is very beautiful. And please pay attention to a lot of the spirals and the curves that Verrocchio is embedding into his drawings, because you'll see them again in Leonardo. This is bust of a warrior. Leonardo was very interested in facial expressions and how it could sort of emit emotions from the soul. But what I want you to pay a special attention to is all the swirls and spirals that you can see in both the headdress and into the warrior's costume. So at the beginning of this lecture, I said, he had this unbelievable ability to combine disciplines. He would see one thing in one area and then make connections to another area. And I think that's where his expertise and his real genius lie. This is one of his sketches. He left many, many pages of sketches. Unfortunately, after he died, the sketchbooks kind of just got scattered. They got, all over Europe. And even today, some of them are reappearing. So maybe, who knows, in your attic there could be a Leonardo da Vinci sketch. But this is an embryo of a cow. And isn't it interesting that we keep seeing these sort of spiral effects? Apparently, you can see a upside down cow. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but you can see the hind legs over there on the right-hand side. He was always looking for connections and thinking, well, from this embryo, comes a large cow. And there really was that idea during that time period was that they had the little miniature cow inside of it. And in some ways it does. So in Ammonite, Leonardo was one of the first to suggest that the earth may have been flooded at some point. So he's out there in the mountains and he just, picks up, oh, I see his little white thing, and he's like, oh, that's a seashell. Most of the people at that time, when they found seashells up on the mountains, they thought, oh, okay, the flood of Noah. The Noah's flood caused the seashells to sort of be put up on the mountaintops. Well, that doesn't make much sense because, as you know, seashells don't float. So Leonardo was one of the first to suggest, well, maybe this mountaintop was actually the bed of the sea, the ocean floor. And now that is what we believe actually happened. So he was smart. He put two and two together. He was one of the first to say that actually the sun didn't move. And that was pretty epic for his time period, because at that point they were still thinking that maybe the earth was flat and things that the sun was actually moving from east to west. Study of a flat spiral of an ammonite. There you see the spiral again. These are all taken from images of his sketchbooks. And then a left-handed screw there on the right-hand side. Really interested in the physics of things too. And you may be aware that he eventually gets employed as an engineer for the Duke of Milan. So this is an interesting, this is actually a copy by Rubens, because we don't have the original of his mural. But this is the Battle of Anghiari. He was commissioned to do this battle scene right next to one that was going to be done by Michelangelo. Both of them never finished them. This one was technical failure, but what I do want you to focus in on is, again, he's imbuing his works with these natural forms, and the natural forms often take the shape of spirals. He was fascinated by it. A lot of times spirals are symbols for growth, for expansion, as you can imagine. Spiral staircase in a tower. There you can see where one person probably would never meet the other, because they're two independent steps that you can go either up and down independently. And you can see probably the close connection between a shell, where you have that spiral, that internal spiral of the shell. So he did studies of spiral staircases. You can see on the right-hand side his fascination with these geometric curves. And then this is one that he actually designed. This is the Chateau of Bleu, and this is in France. And you can see it's actually turning left as it goes down. We believe that Leonardo was left-handed. He has a sketch where it shows, his hand actually in a left-handed position, so we're thinking that he was left-handed. He also, when he would write in mirror script,
A lot of people say, well, that was to kind of fool people or so that they couldn't copy his notes. The most recent thought was, well, maybe he's doing it because he was left-handed. And you only know this if you're left-handed when you're writing in like ink that kind of smudges. But if you move from right to left, then you can keep, you know, your hand from smudging the ink. That's my explanation. I don't know if I quite get the one about the, you know. He also developed a mysterious code. So if he did want to really, you know, code his works, he would use his code. So there's another view of that left-handed spiral. And then here's a comparison of the two. So his expertise is, you know, observing nature, observing those beautiful curves, and then integrating them into his designs. Absolutely beautiful. There's the left-handed, there's this left-handed, or that mirror script, that's actually says Leonardo, and this is actually a drawing by him, with the hand of the left hand. So, this is another one he designed, which is absolutely beautiful, double spiral staircase in Chambord, France. And this is very similar to, in design of the double helix of the DNA. And this, of course, would be way before DNA, you know, was actually like observed in an electron microscope. So he was a really, really forward-thinking individual, amazing in the way that he was able to make those connections. He would go out and he would collect specimens, and then after collecting specimens, he would do drawings. This is a beautiful study of growth of flowers. This is the Star of Bethlehem. And I can't help but make connections between the way that he's creating these curves and his later studies. Later on in his life, he became very much interested in water currents, and he has some beautiful designs of how the water kind of just manifests itself in a river. If you're a kayaker or a canoer or a surfer, you probably share his passion for water and the way that water kind of does these weird things. You know what eddies are? Yeah. Eddies, right? So you have the major river going down this way, and what happens is the water kind of splices off and actually goes in the opposite direction. And if you're, you know, if you can kind of see the water, as good kayakers and canoeists can, you can actually see where you want to go in terms of not getting, you know, like flipped over or whatever. So that fascinated him. Plus the fact that he understood like hydrodynamics, the power of water, too. So just looking at that drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, and then looking at this diagram of a sunflower, you can start to pick up some of those sort of patterns that he really was really hungry to see in other places. So this is known as spiral phylactaxis, and that is taking those Fibonacci numbers, and they actually relate to the rows of the sunflower. And there are two series of rows. One goes in one direction, and then the other row goes in the other direction. And sure enough, these are 21 and 34 are pairs in the Fibonacci numbers, which kind of blows my mind. Like, and time and time again, you pick up a pine cone and you count the things on the pine cone, and it's a Fibonacci number. Like, what the heck? So there's got to be something to it, right? And to me, it's the idea that Mother Nature is very economical. If she wants to pack as many sunflower seeds into the head of a sunflower, physically, the Fibonacci numbers is the answer. And so she does it, you know, she does it intuitively. This is beautiful. This is, you know, the raspberries. And I just love the idea of the branching off of the way in which branches divide and subdivide. And he was observing these. And as we look at the branching of some plants, they also follow a Fibonacci series. Not all of them, but some of them do. The 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 series. It's really kind of fascinating. And once you see, you know, once you open your eyes up to this concept of the golden ratio, you're kind of like, oh, there it is, there it is, there it is. It really is all over. And this is absolutely beautiful. This is a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, and this is his preliminary sketches for Leda and the Swan. He was, you know, kind of enamored with the story of Leda and Swan, which is an ancient story. But I can't help notice the beautiful weaving, braiding of her hair there, kind of emulating those spirals that he found not only in nature, but in you know, nature and water, and in the shells that he would find. So he drew spirals with evident purpose of weaving them in a conventional pattern of decoration. He was using them as an elaboration, and also sort of an investigation on how do these lay out, how do they look, how can I make them as aesthetically pleasing as possible. And there's another one. I was quite fascinated by the story of Leda and the Swan. There, you know, when you study these sketches, you really get into the mind, or you can imagine the mind. He's always just trying to, you know, tweak it, change it, do iterations of them, and they're just absolutely fascinating and beautiful. Bill Gates owns one of the series of sketchbooks. If you had all the money in the world, right, I think I maybe would buy a few pages of Leonardo's sketchbooks. Here's a portrait that he did. So Leonardo, you probably are aware, really only finished a handful of paintings, which is kind of wild. He started a lot, never finished a lot. He messed around with the technical formulas for many of his paintings. Say, for instance, if he was doing the Last Supper. The Last Supper was actually a technical failure. You realize that. We'll get into it a little bit, but this is one that is exquisite and amazing. This is Ginevra da Vinci. And if we look closely at all the details, you'll see that he imbues his work with not only a fingerprint. This was new. This is a fairly new finding. You know, the curators and the museum people, they scour these masterpieces, and I can imagine just like with a microscope, they're like, oh my God, there's his fingerprint. So, well, you know, it's probably his fingerprint, but this is absolutely beautiful. The way he's able to use, there's a word known as sfumato. Sfumato is a smoke-like haziness to describe contours. What was happening during this time period? This is 1474, right? So this is sort of mid-career. Oil painting has been newly rediscovered up in the north. So that would be in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. And it's slowly making its way down to Italy. So the Italian artists are like, oh my gosh, this stuff is amazing, what you can do with oil paint versus tempera. I don't know if you've ever worked with tempera versus oil painting, and you're trying to create like a chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is the light that goes around an object to make it look three-dimensional. And all of a sudden the doors were blown open, and they're like, holy smokes, we can make these things just incredibly realistic because we now have the oil paint. Because the oil paint doesn't dry quickly. And so I can kind of mess around with it. I can do translucent layers, and that's exactly what he did. And when you look at Ginevra, it's almost like she's glowing within. And that's the trick, you know, to do these translucent layers so you can see that under layer, it's called glazing, and the sort of the light coming through it. And so that's part of the beauty of Leonardo's expertise, and he was meticulous. I mean, you know, he has this great idea, and he's trying to make it, you know, come to fruition in a material form, and he's like, I can't do it. That's why he didn't finish a lot of his work, because he was like, I can't do it. You know, I've got this thing in my idea in my head, and I just can't do it. But this one is finished and absolutely beautiful. That sort of, what about the emotion on this Ginevra's face? What do you want to say? If you could jump inside her and feel what she was feeling, what would you be feeling? And we can have several of them, and there's no right answer.
Distant jealousy.
Distant jealousy. Good one.
Bored.
Bored. Good one.
Yeah, bored.
Bored. Yeah. To me, there's boredom, and there's just a tinge of sadness also. I don't know if it's the drop of the mouth, but yeah. So he is able to capture certain emotion. Certainly not happy, you know, not radiating at all. But there's those beautiful curls and curves and spirals that he so loved. And if we analyze this and take, say, the basic, you know, top of her hair, the part of her hair going down to the bodice, we see a golden rectangle. This is kind of an interesting photograph because for so long we thought this was the portrait, and we were happy with the portrait and everything was great. And then at the National Gallery down in Washington, a gentleman pieced together that, oh no, there was more to the portrait. They were actually, you know, her hands were added.
So he was able to piece the portrait together, and that's not uncommon for a lot of portraits. They, for whatever reason, they get chopped off. That's what happened to the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa had two columns on either side of her, chop, chop, you know, whatever. Maybe it didn't fit into a certain spot for a setting, you know. So mid-career, he, so where were we? We were with, he was in the studio of Verrocchio, right? And then Verrocchio says, I'm not doing any of this anymore because you're too good. And so then he becomes a master. So now he's a master, he's independent. And so he's, you know, working for commissions. Everybody loves him, and he's painting and painting. And then he gets the opportunity to go to Milan, where the Duke of Milan, whose name is Ludovico Sforza, they called him Il Moro because he was very dark-skinned, and the Moro means the Moor, you know, the sort of the southern, the Portuguese and sometimes the Moorish from Portugal, right? And then he goes to Milan, and he presents Ludovico Sforza with a silver dragon-headed lute, because he was a musician also. And so, of course, Ludovico's like, oh, you're the best, come on, let's employ you. And in his resume, there was all these things I could do. I'm a musician, I'm a painter, I'm a sculptor, and it was only, I'm an engineer, and it was only at the very bottom line that he said, you know, that he was a painter. It's like, oh, okay, so that's one of your like last things you want to say. So he stayed there for 20 years. So he was hired pretty much as the engineer, because Ludovico Sforza was, he was, you know, military aggressive, and he was out to get all the other city-states in Italy, at least in northern and central Italy. So, so here is one of the portraits that he finished. There's a finished one that he did for Ludovico's mistress. I love this one, Lady with the Ermine. Absolutely incredible. He has this sort of internal spiral of the figure, which is known as contrapposto. She's twisting right, and so is the little weasel. The ermine is twisting right. It's just absolutely phenomenal the way he's able to, you know, capture the different textures, the different emotions on her face. So let's do the same thing. Let's pretend we're jumping into her head, and we're trying to imagine what we're feeling if we have an emotion. What do you think?
Contentment.
Yes.
There's a contentment, right?
Yeah.
There's a tiny little bit of mischievousness
Yes.
to her, and it's almost like the ermine and she share some characteristics. There's a little bit of mischievousness in there, and she seems to be, there's a slight turn of her mouth, you know, fairly, you said content, and I think I agree, absolutely. And this gives you some sense of the style of the time, right? That slit open sleeve, the heavy velvets, the beautiful bead that the necklace that she has made of beads, incredible in terms of the detail. And then if we analyze the overall rectangle and do our divine proportions, her chin matches up, and then it's almost a bullseye with the ermine's eye.
She's cleverly wondering.
Yes, she is. I like that. You can feel her brain is working. She's not just a dullard.
She is.
She's probably pretty young, just like 15 or 16. Yeah, when she was painted. So, young mistress. And then, of course, we can't have a lecture on Leonardo da Vinci without dear Mona Lisa. We don't know specifically who she was. We do believe she was a, you know, the wife of a wealthy merchant, Francesco de Gioconda. In fact, if you go to Italy and you say the Mona Lisa, nobody understands what you say. You have to say La Gioconda. That means the Mona Lisa. So did not complete it until 1507. He loved this painting, and he never parted with it. In fact, when he is in his later years, it would have it under his arm, and he would travel with it wherever he went. And when he passed away, it was very, very close by. So it was, you know, it was never without, you know, within arm's reach of him. He really loved it, and it is really stunning. If you've ever seen it, it's really hard to see in person. It's like, it's got this big, huge, bulletproof room around it. You can't get very close to it, and every time you get close to it, there's like a whole crowd of people. So, you know, it's definitely worth seeing, but don't get your hopes up too high, because you're like, I can't even see the thing, I can't even get close, because there's so many people, and there's this bulletproof cube around it. But in any case,
there she is in all her beauty and splendor, and if you can look just very carefully, you can see, and I keep trying to use my laser, but it won't work, vestiges of those columns that used to be on the left and right of her, but there she is in all her
How
splendor.
important is his coloring, use of coloring?
His
It's magnificent.
Yes, it is, and you know, we're looking at a painting, or we're seeing a reproduction of a painting, and his colors were absolutely beautiful. They weren't extreme like some of the Venetian painters. He was trained in sort of a Florentine style, so that means that they were a little bit more reserved in their colors. The Florentines were not quite as flashy like the Venetians were, but certainly a real knowledge of what he can do with color.
Did he mix his own?
Yes. Yeah, he would know that through and through because as his training with Verrocchio, that's where he would start. He'd be the apprentice, and then he would have to know how to mix the rabbit skin glue, how to put the panels together, how to mix your pigment. He would go through all that, you know, the chemistry and everything like that, and then he would move on to a journeyman, and then he'd be a master. That's the first thing he would do, yeah, grinding pigments and so on. And that's just a fascinating sort of sidetrack to, you know, the painter's life back then. But absolutely wonderful, and then we automatically see this golden rectangle around her face. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but you know, up here she does have a very thin veil, right? So that's sort of they say that it's an indication of sort of modesty. So he was able to create that transparency through the translucent glazes.
She's younger than I thought she was.
Yeah, because they're not exactly sure of her, you know, we can't really nail down her age, but I think I would put her at what age do you think she would be? You know, in her 20s or something like that.
She was older.
Yeah, yeah. She's mysterious for sure. Her asymmetry of her face, right? That sort of asymmetrical smile. You're not quite sure what she's thinking. There's a lot of inconsistencies to it. If you look at the backgrounds don't match up. There's all kinds of strange, mysterious things in it, and it just keeps calling us. You know, it's like we can't grasp it. It's almost like she has so many questions, and we keep asking questions, and she never really gives us any true answers, and that's what keeps us coming back.
But she has a confidence.
She does.
Yeah.
She's very settled in.
Yeah.
She seems to be happy, but there's a certain comfort level there with her. Yeah. And she's looking at us straight in the eye,
Yeah.
right? There's a sort of almost a you know, directness to it.
Do you think he was in love with her?
I don't know. I don't think we don't know, you know, we don't know what kind of relationship he had with her. My sense is that he was a homosexual. There is some, you know, small indications that he preferred men over women, so he never married. He had some very close relationships with men, younger boys, so, you know, we don't know. There's no facts to sort of tie that in, but my sense is that he probably was more effeminate than, you know, compare him to, say, Michelangelo, who never was married and never really had any, he had a few several, you know, very close women friends and male friends, but he never married, never had children. Same thing with Leonardo. He was sort of a singular soul. It's thought that Leonardo da Vinci may have used the golden rectangle. We don't know for sure, but you know, you could superimpose a golden spiral on there and it sort of matches up. You know, some of this you can say, well, yes, maybe no, but he certainly was aware of it. And then this is the Last Supper, which this was a technical disaster. The problem was he was such a scientific experimentalist that he was like, okay, here's the tempo. So this is fresco. Does everybody know what fresco is? Fresco is I first get my plan, and I have to mix up my plaster. If you ever worked with plaster, you have the clock is ticking, right? So I take my plaster, and I only cover what I can do in a day, di giorno it's called. And then I take my pigment, and I add the pigment to the fresh plaster. There is a chemical bond between the pigment and the plaster, so it's a very durable material. It actually sinks into the wall, and it's there. So what does Leonardo do? He's like, I don't want this pressure. I want to paint when I want to paint. So what does he do? He adds a bunch of craziness to it. He adds oils, because that's going to slow down your pigment drying time, some other stuff, pitch and bitumen, and he puts it on, and sure enough, it is beautiful. But right away, it's in Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, which is a church. It's in a refectory of a church, which is the dining hall, the church for the monks. Pretty much as soon, maybe a couple years later, the monks walk in and they're like, what the heck? The whole thing is sort of flaking off the wall. And they're just like, and so from then on, it was a series of restorations, until about the 80s, where one woman, Brambilla was her name, she was Italian, and she would do the size of a postage stamp in 1 week or something crazy like that. And she's restoring this thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And they had a huge Polaroid camera to record the whole thing, sponsored by the Nippon Corporation, the whole bit. But unfortunately, we only have about 17% of the original painting today. It's very unfortunate. But it's amazing. It really is incredible. The beauty of it is that it is mathematically balanced, and it's also it's a psychological insight into when Jesus said, you know, he has his Last Supper, right? And he's around his friends, and all of a sudden he stops and he says, one of you is going to betray me. Well, can you imagine? You're at dinner with your friends, and there's this one person you're just like, I love you. And all of a sudden he stops and he says, one of you is going to rat me out. How would you feel? So these are the responses of all the apostles, all of his friends. They're like, are you kidding me? Huh, what, me? No, I'd never do that. So it was a psychological investigation into that reaction of his friends saying, you know, how could you say that, Jesus? And there you can see, you know, the groups of 3, 3, 3, 3. It's all mathematical. It's all mathematical. Yeah. So there's another. This is there's a guy who looks for these mathematical, golden means, and he does the divisions back there. He even did them up in the decoration of the molding up on top. The Last Supper is just amazing that it actually survived. It got bombed in World War II. It suffered all kinds of ravages and so on, and it's still good to go. I mean, we only have a little bit of it, but it still stands. They put a doorway. They wrecked Jesus' feet. You know, it's like, oh, come on, give this poor masterpiece a break. And then in 2017, they did have a discovery. They found an original Leonardo da Vinci, which is amazing. It was for many years thought to be a copy. Experts are saying, you know, they could be wrong, but experts are saying that yes, indeed, this is the real McCoy, and it's absolutely beautiful. Painted around the time of the Mona Lisa. It's known as the Salvator Mundi. That means the savior of the world. Absolutely beautiful. That chiaroscuro that I mentioned, and also that sfumato. And this one has golden rectangles all over it too. Absolutely beautiful. The design in here in the brocade is incredible. This is all, they've worked it out that this is all golden mean stuff too. And the curls, we can't forget about the curls. This is the Virgin and Child. There's 2 versions of them here. Virgin of the Rocks, 1478. And there on the right, you can see the beautiful angel. And there you can see those ripples, hair, the curls, looking like a cascading river. And there's a close-up of it. Absolutely beautiful. I mean, to make this kind of detail, you're using brushes that have like 1 and 2 hairs to them. And you can imagine how labor-intensive this was. And there's another schematic of the golden mean, pretty much following key parts of the painting.
Do we have any idea how long it took for these paintings?
For these paintings?
On the average?
Oh, on the average, they really ranged. I mean, most of them took a long time because he would stop and start and stop and start. Some of the murals he would leave, for weeks and then come back, and he'd put a little dish dash on it and then leave again. So he wasn't like, real rigorous in terms
So
of.
his studios were all over?
He had one major, it depends where he was, but in Milan he would move every once in a while. So at this point he's in Milan, working for the Duke of Milan, the Ludovico Sforza. And this is when he teams up with this gentleman, Fra Luca Pacioli, who was a Franciscan monk, and he's known for the father of accounting and bookkeeping. He was hired, Leonardo was hired to illustrate a book known as The Divine Proportion. And here are some of the illustrations from the book. These are Platonic solids, and Leonardo was one of the first to actually do this kind of skeleton drawing, where he would make the faces of the solids actually look so that you can read them, and then you can actually see the things behind. So some of them are solid and some of them are vacui, which means, you know, they're empty. So these are pretty amazing. He's starting to learn mathematically how to render these, and he's learning them from this guy Pacioli. And so this was the skeletonic solids, which allow an easy distinction between front and back. This had never been done before. And there's that one that says vacuous. Vacuous, that means that means empty. And there's the solid, and there's the empty one. And these forms are all created by repeating, just like a pentagon or a isosceles triangle or whatever it is. And here's some more. These are all him. You can see that these are the Platonic solids. And then here again, this is Leonardo's drawing. This isn't my drawing. He's very much interested in the proportions, and those are golden proportions. Excuse me, along with this one, this is a drawing by Leonardo. He's again interested in proportion, and that's a golden rectangle. And they're filled with him trying to work out this system. Pretty amazing. I love how expressive some of his pieces are. You can just imagine his mind going and how he's just like working and working, trying to figure out. It's like a genius trying to,
His
solve the problem.
understanding of the anatomy of the body, did he do dissections?
He did. He would go in and dissect corpses. He was one of the very first to diagnose the hardening of the arteries. He actually did a dissection and said, oh, well, this guy, his arteries are all clogged up, so it was pretty amazing. The sections of the toes there, the foot, and this one, which is known as the Vitruvian Man. What he did was he took the writings, the description of Vitruvius, who was back in the Roman time period, and he drew a man who's sort of the measure of all things. So inscribed in a circle and then in a square. Some of the earlier versions of this, not by Leonardo, but earlier artists, they never could quite get it right because it only works when you kind of juxtapose the center of the figure. If you can see how the navel kind of does a little bit of a jog as it moves, but that was his solution, and it actually works. So it's like the navel does a little bit of a jump when he goes up into the circular form. That makes sense because in the circular form the legs are actually raised, but that's really quite amazing. So the idea that, and have you ever done that? Have you ever tried to figure that out? Your wingspan is the same as your height. Mine's actually, I have long arms. My wingspan is actually longer than your height. Has anybody done that? We'll have to do it and see. Yeah. We're supposed to be a square. It's supposed to be a square. Some people, different dimensions. And then again, this is another golden mean sort of description of the human body. We've seen that before with the arms and the wrists and the hands proportion. And then getting towards the end, he became very interested in hydraulics. He would do a lot of work with irrigation and with pumps and canals and systems. During this time period, there were some series of plagues. It wasn't a big, black plague, but they would go through series of time periods when a lot of people would get sick from contagious diseases. They hadn't quite figured it out. And Leonardo actually said, well, if you could get rid of the sewage that is, like on the streets, maybe we could reduce some of our disease. So he would go in and design sewage systems to make the cities a lot more cleaner. But this is his description of the end of time, the deluge, which is the flood, the great flood. And this is also reminiscent of what I kept showing you, like the curls of the angels and so on. You see a similarity there. Another sort of eddy and main flow. And then getting back to the similarity of the Bethlehem star. And this is deluge with rocks, floods, and tree. Really interested in the way in which things ebb and flow. This is absolutely fascinating here. one where the flood is going past a barrier and where you can see the eddy. This is one where it's pooling into a large sort of pool area and how it's sort of doing a counter rotation. And then this is a close-up of one of the angel's hair, just like we saw with the Virgin in the rocks. So proportions are found not only in numbers and measures, but also in sounds, landscapes, times, and positions, and in every sort of power. So he was aware of how he could apply certain systems to other disciplines. This is Deluge again. This is from his sketchbooks. And that's the quote again, let proportion be found not only in numbers and measures, but also in sounds, weights, times, and positions, and whatever force there is. So he died, I mean, the story is that he died in the arms of the French king. He was taken under his care, so that's nice to know that he was taken care of in his old age, because after his father died, he had step brothers and sisters that took all his, there wasn't a will that was left, so he didn't really have a lot of money. Fortunately, he had an uncle. His uncle's name is Francesca, and he took care of him. But they said as soon as he died, all the money and the land would go back to the original full, the sons and daughters of his father. So it was nice that the King of France took him under his wing, and he died in very nice situation. All the king demanded or asked of him was that he have a conversation with Leonardo every day. And so you can just imagine the king and Leonardo kind of hanging out, and the king would ask him a question and Leonardo would answer it. And the king said he learned so much that he never knew a man who knew so much. So it was kind of a nice way to kind of end the life of an amazing man. So that's it. And does anybody have any questions? I don't consider myself to be an expert on Leonardo, but I certainly have a wonderful interest in it, and I hope that it would, spike your interest in maybe learning more about his amazing life and his works. Yes?
Did he design that instrument that you were using? Is that
This
his
one?
as well?
No, he did
Okay.
not. And these calipers, these are all over the place, and I do not know when they started to be used. I mean, this basic idea, just the 1 and 2 were way back with the Egyptians, and they think that this was one of the basic ideas for the, they had just a few very basic instruments for creating the pyramids. One was, of course, the pendulum, and the other one was a caliper. So, but I don't know about this one. I don't know when it was invented, but I do know that it had been around for a while.
Is that the Masonic Lodge symbol, is that?
Ooh, yeah, and that's, I don't think it's this one.
Okay.
I think it's just the single one.
All right.
And that is, obviously you would imagine this, the caliper is the measurement, to measure things, to know things. Yeah, that's a good connection. Because of course the Masons have all that kind of crazy symbolism and things like that, the Leonardo code or the Da Vinci code, that kind of thing. Anybody else? Questions? Yes?
Self-portrait?
Very good question. So there's a lot of controversy about that one. I put it up there because there is no real confirmed self-portrait of Leonardo. Most people think that this is a self-portrait. There's a lot of conjecture that it's actually his father. So it's the closest thing we have to a likeness of Leonardo. If they go ahead and date something like this, or they date that, it goes back to, because he's an older man, right? The date of the paper is closer, it lines up closer to being a portrait of his father rather than a self-portrait of himself. Thanks for asking that. But nothing is confirmed in that area. There's only conjecture. So we can assume that it is either him or his father, and then from then we can say, well, he looked probably pretty much like his father, right, at the very least. So at least we're looking at some semblance of what he looked like. Yeah. Great. Well, super. Thanks so much for your attention.